point. Je ne sais pas. Je peux pas savoir. Est-ce que vous avez une petite idée? J'en ai une, mais je la garde. Les enquêteurs disent que la personne qui a fait ça est dans le cercle familial. Vous y pensez? Personnellement, oui, mais il paraît que non. On verra. J'attends.
What you just heard was a radio broadcast aired in the early hours of October 17th, 1984, in the Vosges region of northeastern France. The reporter is speaking to the father of a 4-year-old boy named Grégory Villemin, who was found tied and bound in the nearby Vologne River the night before. The reporter is asking Grégory's father, Jean-Marie, if he knows who did this to his son, and if he believes that person to be a family member. The father replies yes. L'affaire Grégory, as the crime came to be known, instantly became a national obsession. 37 years after the assassination, one still overhears debates over who did the child in throughout France. Sadly, the riddle that is Grégory Villemin's death has yet to be solved. However, every so many years, as DNA testing and science evolve, evidence in the way of clothing and letters is tested once again in hopes of discovering with certainty, once and for all, who done it. Particularly egregious, whoever plotted and carried out the crime is believed to be among the Villemins' extended clan. You heard that right. The person responsible for this heinous crime is thought to be a family member. Tragically, as of 2022, no one has ever been tried for or convicted of the crime. And these days, the clock's ticking. Several persons of interest are now elderly. The time for justice and unmasking the monsters is running out. Introducing the latest podcast series from Bed Crime Stories podcast, Monsters in the Family. I'm your host, T, and I'll be examining the fascinating backdrop of the crime, the 18-month period before Grégory's death, when an anonymous caller known as Le Corbeau, or the Crow, waged an incessant campaign of harassment against the Villemins. Whoever took the 4-year-old from his front yard on the afternoon of October 16, 1984, then bound his hands and feet with cord, covered his face with his wool cap, and threw him into the wild, freezing currents of the Vologne River, was most likely someone Grégory trusted, someone he knew, someone who betrayed the innocent child's trust. Logic tells the investigators that the carefully orchestrated, impeccably timed crime, which took place in a relatively short window of time, had to have been carried out by more than one person, as in multiple monsters within the clan. I'll also be digging further into the 3 elements that the family and investigators believe fueled the crime. 1. Long-term generational feuding among the clan, namely between the Jacob family and the Villemin family. 2. Jealousy of Jean-Marie and Christine Villemin, who appeared to have it all: career success, a beautiful, healthy, and gifted child, a new house on a hill filled with expensive new furniture, a happy family fold wherein they enjoyed weekly Sunday dinners with Jean-Marie's parents and siblings, the kind of pure love that some only see in the movies. 3. Deeply rooted anger that was kept simmering under wraps for years until it exploded that day in October. I'll also detail the events that transpired on Tuesday, October 16th, 1984, the day Grégory was taken, both from the parents' perspective as well as that of the local military police captain who was at the scene when Grégory's body was pulled from the river and who co-led the initial investigation. And you'll also meet the Villemin, the family at Ground Zero, as well as alleged persons of interest within their clan who may have had the motive to inflict maximum pain on the couple. If you want to know all the nitty-gritty pieces of the Grégory Villemin puzzle, follow me. Our story begins in May of 1981, 3 years before Grégory's murder. 1981 is a year of extraordinary good fortune for little Grégory's parents, Christine and Jean-Marie Villemin. They're enjoying their first child, Grégory, who was born the year before, and they're reaping the spoils of years of hard work and strict budgeting. They've just moved into their dream home, built on a prime property on a hill in the village of Lepanges-sur-Vologne. Thanks to Jean-Marie's promotion the year before to the position of contremaître, or foreman, at the car seat manufacturing plant where he works, the couple is doing exceptionally well financially. Jean-Marie is only the second person in the family to attain the position of chef or boss, as one would say in English, and he did it in record time, achieving the lofty title at just 22 years old. In the rural villages of the Vologne Valley, where pretty much everyone works as a laborer in the myriad cotton and sawmills, bosses are generally not well liked. Jean-Marie Villemin writes in Le 16 Octobre, the book he wrote with his wife Christine and journalist Laurence Beccaria. In my entire family, whether among the Jacob, the Villemin, or others, there had only ever been one foreman. It was a cousin much older than I, and who, by the way, had problems with his own family, who he had to manage at the factory. My promotion was perceived badly. My father was proud of my success, yet, at the same time, he was always criticizing his own foreman. My brother Michel's wife thought that I would no longer speak to her. One of my cousins said to me, "Hello, Giscard," because those who make more than 6,000 francs a month are Giscardiens. End quote. The term Giscard was used to refer to followers of the then President of France, Valéry Giscard d'Estaing, who was known to be liberal on social issues such as divorce, contraception, and abortion. So calling Jean-Marie a Giscard was an insult from his relatives who supported more right-wing policies. Even Christine was getting smack at her workplace by some of the other young women. Christine recalls, "At my work, I didn't say anything, but one girl heard about the promotion. She said to me, 'It must be hard to live with a boss. She thought you gave orders at our house, too.'" End quote. In these small villages, bosses are the enemy, and news travels fast. 1981 is also the year when an anonymous person suddenly starts waging a multi-year campaign of terror against the Villemin, including Christine and Jean-Marie's parents, Albert and Monique Villemin. The unknown person, who will become known as Le Corbeau, the Crow, makes the first of what will eventually turn into more than 800 anonymous and threatening phone calls to the Villemin. The first call comes in at Albert and Monique Villemin's home in the town of Aumazet. During the call, the Crow lobs insults at Monique and Albert, and makes it clear that he wants Albert to die, preferably by suicide, like Albert's father, Gaston. Albert's dad was a prisoner of war, and when he returned home after captivity, he hanged himself from a tree in the local churchyard. It's important to note why the name Crow came to be associated with the collar. Here's how Jean-Marie Villemin, Little Grégory's father, describes a crow. A crow is someone who never expresses his hatred. He needs to terrorize his victim and then enjoy the show. To do that, you have to be close by. Many calls were traced where the crow was observing my father's house. For example, when the crow called my dad and said, "You're lying. I saw him leave." Or, "It wasn't worth having the cops come out," right after the police left my parents' house. There were also all these cars being moved and deliveries being made that were prompted by the crow, who rejoiced in watching the chaos. End quote. In addition to calling Albert and Monique, the crow also gets a kick out of calling the local funeral home and Albert's private nurse and telling them that Albert has just been in a car accident, or worse, has just died. Suddenly an ambulance turns up at the Villemins' home with its sirens blaring and red lights blazing, only to find a confused Albert very much alive. Talk about stressful. Little Grégory's parents, Christine and Jean-Marie Villemin, are also targeted by the crow. They received their first call in August of that same summer, about 1 month after the phone was installed in their newly built home. The modest chalet-style home up on a hill in Lepanges-sur-Vologne, the village where Christine works, immediately becomes a source of envy for the crow, although Christine and Jean-Marie don't yet know it. On that August day, the crow calls Jean-Marie and Christine multiple times, hanging up as soon as they pick up. The phone rings again late in the day, but this time the caller stays on the line. Jean-Marie explains. Then, around midnight, we heard a record playing in the background, playing a song called "Boss, a Little Drink, We're Thirsty," with a woman's voice singing along. The following day, the crow calls again. This time, he plays a song called "I Miss You," which is followed by laughter and the click of the collar hanging up. It wasn't until fall that the crow finally spoke, this time to Christine. Here's what she said about that. "In November, I heard the crow's voice for the first time as he insulted me and called me all sorts of names. I asked him, 'What have I done to you?' And he responded, 'It's not you, it's your old man.'" End quote. Now here I believe that old man is referring to Christine's husband, Jean-Marie. Christine's father had died years earlier. Christine describes the crow's voice as hoarse and belonging to a male. Thus it appears that we may have both a male and a female crow. Take a listen to the crow's voice. It's not long before this person or persons escalate the harassment into acts of vandalism at Jean-Marie and Christine's house in Lepanges. One night, Christine is home alone with little Grégory, as Jean-Marie works the late shift at the factory. Both Christine and little Grégory are sleeping when the sound of breaking glass pierces the silent night. Christine runs toward the front door, where she sees a hand reaching through the broken window. Terrified, she immediately dials Jean-Marie at work, who tells her to call their nearest neighbor, Monsieur Mélin. When Monsieur Mélin arrives with his rifle, the vandal is gone, But Christine and Jean-Marie are not convinced at this point that the vandalism is related to the calls. They reason that it might have been a drunk who got lost on the way home, or perhaps it's just a coincidence that someone vandalized their home at the same time that they're being hounded by this crow. Despite their uncertainty, they do take some precautions. They install iron grills on their windows, as well as security shutters. Jean-Marie also buys a .22 long rifle, just in case. A little while after the incident, in early 1982, the crow calls Monique Villemin, Jean-Marie's mother, and takes responsibility for the damage, saying this: "I've broken the boss's door. His wife's terrified. The next time, she won't just be afraid." End quote. This is when Jean-Marie realizes the crow is willing to do more than just talk smack. Side note, it's been theorized that the crow didn't vandalize Albert and Monique Villemin's house in the village of Vologne because their grown son Michel, who lived right next door, had a dog that barked at every little sound. Also, Vologne was a relatively small hamlet with only about 500 inhabitants, where everyone knew everyone else. Even the most talented cat burglar would have been challenged committing a crime unseen there. But Jean-Marie and Christine's house, outside of the neighboring village of Lepanges and up on a hill, was isolated and offered the perfect place to commit a crime unnoticed. Jean-Marie tells Christine how he felt after the vandalism. "I was worried about your safety. I thought he would rape you, attack you, but I never thought he would harm our kid. My father was afraid for himself, but he never thought to protect my little brother, Lionel." End quote. In fact, from Albert and Monique to Jean-Marie and Christine, no one ever imagined that this crow person would harm a child. The very thought was simply absurd. The family's worries were more about Christine getting attacked or the house being further vandalized. After the crow's call to Monique, Jean-Marie buys a pistol for Christine to carry in her purse, and Christine begins the practice of sleeping at her mother's house with Gregory when Jean-Marie works the night shift. Christine also stops running errands alone, which, if you've ever lived in France, you know is a huge inconvenience. When I lived there in 1989, women, yes, it was mostly women, grocery shopped daily, especially for a fresh baguette from the baker. When I read about Christine not feeling safe shopping solo, it hit me how much the crow was upending the Villemins' daily lives. Not only were they terrified every time the phone rang, they were also continually looking over their shoulders and feeling on edge. So this crime entails both Gregory's death and the crow's 18-month campaign of terror against the family. That's a long time to be harassed by a caller who rings and rings all day and all night, and by his threats and acts of violence. Back then, the phone was usually on a wall. When someone called, you had to actually get up to answer it. And poor Albert Villemin, Jean-Marie's dad, who receives most of the crow's 800 calls, well, he was constantly being prevented from resting. Christine describes Albert's demeanor at the time like this: "It was gnawing at him. He talked about it all the time. The crow was destroying his life." End quote. Albert was already suffering from fragile health before the crow showed up, so this was especially taxing on him. Interestingly, Jean-Marie's mother, Monique, was less affected by the crow. For example, She didn't want to get an unlisted phone number, which may have solved a good part of the problem. According to Christine, Monique thought things would eventually blow over, or that the crow really wasn't that much of a threat. To me, this makes it sound like Monique maybe knew who the crow was, and perhaps she didn't think that this person was capable of inflicting physical harm. Like Jean-Marie, she got it wrong. On another night, Christine finds one of the tires on her car flat. The crow then calls the house to brag about it. This is when Jean-Marie takes 15 days off of work to try and catch the crow himself. He comes up with a ruse wherein he pretends to be taking a vacation. He even has his friend, Martial, drive to the house to feign picking him up and taking him to the airport. Jean-Marie spends the days concealed behind his front door, waiting for the crow to show up. But nothing happens. Soon, the Villemins' family life becomes centered around the crow. And by the Villemin here, I'm referring to Albert and Monique, so that would be Jean-Marie's parents and little Gregory's grandparents. I'm also referring to Jean-Marie and Christine, Gregory's parents, and 4 of Albert and Monique's 5 other children, including son Michel, daughter Jacqueline, another son Gilbert, and the youngest son Lionel. The only offspring who was not in open conversations about the crow was their eldest son, Jackie. Now, Jackie was the black sheep of the family. You see, Jackie wasn't Albert's biological son. In fact, back when Albert married Monique Jacob, she was already pregnant with this child by another unnamed man. Baby Jackie arrived just 3 months after the wedding of his parents, and although Albert knew about the pregnancy before he agreed to marry Monique, he never fully embraced little Jackie. By all accounts, Albert did not treat Jackie the same as he did his own biological children. And at some point, Monique even sent young Jackie to live with her parents, Léon and Albeline Jacob, who also lived in the same village of Aumonzé. As an adult, Jackie continued to have a rocky rapport with Albert. And let me make it clear, Albert was not an easy guy to get along with. After an extremely traumatic childhood, which included his mother leading to the death of his older brother in an act of manslaughter, and his father doing himself in that churchyard, Albert had emerged as a tortured, brooding man. He often hit the bottle to excess, and when he did, he would sometimes take out his anger physically on Monique. Jean-Marie says this of his father: "As a child, I was a little afraid of him because he could remain silent for several days and then suddenly explode. With age, I became closer to him. I found him honest. He didn't hide his feelings much, even if expressing them would cause him harm." End quote. Now, Albert also did not like Jackie's wife, Liliane Jacquel. It's also important to note that Michel Villemin, that is Monique and Albert's second son, was illiterate at age 29 due to an intellectual disability. And Albert often criticized Michel for this, which may explain Michel's reputation for being difficult and prone to jealousy. So for a year and 5 months, the Villemin lived this continual nightmare of harassment and threats. Christine says of the period, "Our life was poisoned for a year and a half, 18 months of being afraid to answer the phone, sleep over at my mother's house, to take the revolver, to never run errands alone. Even little Grégory was aware of it. When we'd hang up, he'd ask, "Is it the poem again?" That's the name he gave to the crow. It was agonizing. End quote. As the crow takes over the Villemins' every waking thought, they begin dialing each other up after each call, sharing what the crow said in a bid to figure out who he is. But they were not 100% well organized in this effort, and they didn't have all the information in hand. Albert and Monique began recording the calls as well, so that others in the nuclear family could hear them and weigh in on whom they believed the voice belonged to. So they eventually come to two conclusions, which the local military police will later confirm. One, the crow is someone in the Villemins' extended clan. They know this because the crow brings up long-hidden, little-discussed, dark family secrets. Secrets that mostly have to do with Monique's birth family, the Jacobs, or Jacobs as we would say it in English, and Albert's parents, Gaston and Maria Thérèse Villemin. And two, the crow lives in Aumazé. They know this because sometimes the crow calls Albert and Monique and describes things that are going on at their home in real time. It's as if he's watching them through binoculars from a nearby perch. The crow also has the uncanny ability to repeat what's just been discussed over the Villemins' table during their weekly Sunday family dinners. Is someone within the nuclear family, someone sitting at that dining table, acting as a spy and relaying the conversations to the crow? It certainly seems like it. And one more thing. This crow person really gets off on watching what goes down at the Villemins' house after he pulls his dark pranks and menacing calls. One time, the crow dialed the emergency services and told them Albert Villemin was having a stroke. When the ambulance tears into Aumazé with its siren on and pulls into the Villemins' driveway, Albert and Monique are beyond stunned. That's the level of harassment this creep was doing to this poor family over a several-year period. Over time, the Villemins begin to think that the crow is trying to break up the core of 4 or 5 couples in the family who get along. Those couples are Albert and Monique, Christine and Jean-Marie, Gilbert and his wife, and Jacqueline and her husband. Jean-Marie described it as follows: "The crow couldn't handle it that we all had fun together, that we organized dinners with each other. We never asked ourselves why he suddenly appeared in 1981 and not before that time or after it. We came to the conclusion that he was someone who was jealous and that he wanted to poison our lives." Although the Villemins feel that they're being targeted as a whole by the crow, after the crime, as they and the investigators sift through the evidence, it becomes clear that the crow had 2 main targets, Albert and Jean-Marie. Several themes recur in the crow's communications. There's the recurring use of the word chef, or as we would say in English, boss. The crow also seems obsessed with money, in particular, Jean-Marie and Christine's money. Remember, Jean-Marie is now making more than any of his family members and relatives. When the crow communicates to Jean-Marie, the terms and expressions he uses are almost always the crudest, rudest, and most colloquial. Because I'm translating those terms into English, you likely won't get the full effect of them. They don't sound as guttural as they do in French. So here are some of the sentences the crow expressed to Jean-Marie. "You've got plenty of dough. I can't stomach bosses. You thoroughly disgust me what you spent on your kitchen. I'm going to write Giscard on the outside of your house. I've seen your car. You have to be a boss to afford that." And in a letter to Jean-Marie and Christine, on the day of the murder, the crow writes, "Your money can't get your kid back." At some point, Albert Villemin reports the calls to the local military police, who take the situation very seriously and tap Albert and Monique's phone. But as soon as the phone is tapped, the crow stops calling. Someone tipped him off. Someone likely in the inner family circle, because they were the only ones who were told about the phone tapping. But who? Then the crow takes up a new tactic. He starts sending handwritten letters to the Villemins. The letters boast childlike block letters clearly designed to prevent anyone from recognizing the penmanship. The letters are full of disturbing threats, just as the calls were. Note that the crow will write 5 letters in total from 1983 until 1985. Says Jean-Marie, "The true crow had 2 targets, my dad and me. For my dad, it was raw hatred to the point of writing, 'I will spit on your grave,' as well as encouraging him to do himself in, ordering a hearse to show up at his house, and a constant surveillance of him and the house to try and give him a nervous breakdown. He wanted to ruin his life, and he succeeded because Papa suffered a great deal." End quote. Now, when Albert first reports the crow's calls to the police, he points them toward who he believes is behind the harassment. The name he shares is that of his stepson, Jackie Villemin. Remember, Albert and Jackie have a fractious relationship. Apparently, Albert doesn't care much for Jackie's wife, Lillian, either. Maybe she's the one laughing and singing in the background, he thinks. Jean-Marie supports his father's suspicions because he too has had issues with one of the Jacquels, namely Lillian's father, Roger Jacquel, or Roger as they say in French. Roger, who works at the same factory as Jean-Marie and is a union representative there, openly despises Jean-Marie Villemin because of his refusal to join the union. When Jackie is called down to the police station and learns what he's been accused of by Albert, he's crushed and furious. How could his own family think that he would do such things? Don't they know him? Jackie leaves the station and drives straight to Aumazé to tell his mother and his stepfather, Albert, that he's done with them for good. But even though Jackie swears up and down that he's not the crow, and the police do clear him, the family, including Jean-Marie, still don't believe him. After this, Jean-Marie receives another communication from the crow. He says this, "Then I received a call at my place of work where the crow announced that he was stopping. And then my parents received a new anonymous letter that ended with the words, 'I'm stopping. You'll never find out who I am.'" End quote. Years after Gregory's death, Jean-Marie and Christine will say that they believe the crow stopped the harassment at this point because, without Jackie as a scapegoat, he was afraid of being discovered. However, back in 1983, they naively continued to believe that Jackie was the crow, and that he only stopped because he decided to completely cut ties with the family, and perhaps that he'd finally purged all the anger and venom that had been simmering inside of him. Says Jean-Marie, "We thought that we'd identified the crow, and that he would no longer bother us." Christine adds, The crow disappeared from our lives in May of 1983. In October of 1984, if we closed our shutters when we left home, it was not because of the crow, but because the local police had gone around our neighborhood warning us of a gang of thieves who were traveling through the region. We no longer thought about the calls and the threats. We took up the same lives we had before the crow. Gregory, family, work. We didn't ask any more questions." End quote. So the Villemin go back to normal life. Christine starts running errands alone again. The two parents loosen their security measures and allow Gregory to play outside the house on the hill, unsupervised at times for 15 to 20 minutes, and they stop fearing the crow and analyzing his threats. They believe the crow is gone for good. But they are dead wrong. During the quiet, halcyon summer months of 1984, Jean-Marie and Christine begin building an addition onto their home. They're planning a second baby and need more room. They also take a vacation to Italy with Jean-Marie's parents, Albert and Monique. Many in the valley of the Vologne either can't afford vacations or frown on them. On Sundays, the couple heads to Albert and Monique's house for those family dinners. The love between Jean-Marie and Christine is obvious to all. Life is good. 3 days before Gregory's death, a delivery truck shows up at Christine and Jean-Marie's house on the hill. Inside is a brand new leather sofa, paid for in full. Back in this region of France in the 1980s, a leather sofa is considered the epitome of luxury. Only those with money to spare can have one. News of the couple's latest purchases spreads like a virus through the clan. Envy continues to grow. 2 days before the murder, Jean-Marie's older brother Michel and his wife Ginette invite themselves over to the house on the hill for a drink. Jean-Marie takes the opportunity to show them the work that's going on for the new addition, the bottles of wine he's just purchased, and the newly arrived leather sofa. Michel, clearly impressed, comments, "Seul un chef peut se le permettre," which translates to, "Wow, only a boss can afford that." Note the use of the word chef, or boss. 1 day before Gregory's death. Nothing seems amiss. Neither Jean-Marie nor Christine sense any impending doom. However, unbeknownst to them, a simmering cauldron of hate inside the crow is boiling now and about to explode. I hope you'll join me next time on Bedcrime Stories for episode 2 of Monsters in the Family, when I'll detail the events of Tuesday, October 16th, 1984, the day 4-year-old Grégory Villemin was abducted from his front yard and discovered 4 hours later, bound by his hands and feet, floating in the Vologne River. If you enjoyed this podcast and want to hear more from me, please smash that like button, subscribe, share, and leave me a comment. I'd love to know your thoughts on this very strange, very upsetting case that I am personally hoping will be solved this year once and for all. Until the next time on Bedcrime Stories.